few seconds away. Sheila, I will introduce you. Here we go.
Great.
Sheila Briggs of DeForest is one of 7 candidates for the office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and the primary is February 16th. The general election is April 6th. Sheila, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I have a standard opening question for everybody. You have 1 minute to tell us why you're most qualified to be the superintendent, please.
Fantastic. So I began my 30-year career as a kindergarten teacher. Later, I became principal and then worked in the central office at the Madison Metropolitan School District, supporting 32 elementary school principals. I couldn't have imagined leaving until Tony Evers gave me a call in 2011, and he asked me to join DPI as the Assistant State Superintendent. And so I jumped at the opportunity, and then I was reappointed by Carolyn Stanford Taylor in 2019 when Tony became our governor. So serving in the State Superintendent's cabinet for the last 10 years has been a really incredible experience. And so I know that we still have a lot of work to be done, and I am ready to continue that work, leading our state as the next state superintendent.
Nicely timed. Okay, first question. You have on your website a quote saying a pandemic is an opportunity, quote, a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. Tell me your vision for K12 in Wisconsin once we get through the pandemic, please.
Yeah, so all of my priorities are really wrapped around this idea that school wasn't working for all of our kids prior to the pandemic. So we have to really decide that we're going to move forward in a way that's different. I think there are many things that we really need to rethink about what we're doing when it comes to education. First of all, we need to make sure that we are looking at the priorities that we expect for our kids. And that has to be beyond just reading and test scores. We really got to look at our kids as whole children and make sure that we're approaching all of the different important aspects of education that we care about as Wisconsinites. Second, we need to get back to making sure our teachers are in a place of honor and support and listen to their voices in what we're doing in the classroom. And secondly, we've learned some things through this pandemic. A few things have actually worked really well, and we need to make sure we bring those things into the future so that we're making sure that every kid gets the education that they deserve.
Which of our K through 12 students have been hurt the most by our pandemic, Sheila?
Yeah, I think it's varied a lot. We have some special education students that we're really struggling to meet their needs, particular in a remote setting for some, although I have heard some stories of students that are getting their needs better than ever in a remote environment. So I think that's something that we have to consider. Certainly our students that are living in poverty and our students of color that oftentimes have parents that are serving in the front lines and aren't able to be home and support them in the way that others are struggling immensely. And that's why we've worked to make sure that kids have safe spaces to go and get support during the day for remote instruction in places like Milwaukee and Madison.
You have this pretty scary stat on your website. 60% of high schoolers, I think for the 2019 year, reported a significant mental health issue. So was that pandemic related? No, that was 2019, so it was before the pandemic. But so the mental health needs of our K-12 students have gotten worse through the pandemic?
Yes, that was pre-pandemic, that we were already heading in the wrong direction when it came to stress and anxiety with our kids. So I think we have to make sure that we are taking into account all of the things that we need to do to engage our students, help them feel supported and a sense of belonging in our classroom. But yes, we know that the pandemic, particularly some kids that are in a remote setting, are struggling immensely. And while we've also heard some success stories of kids that are thriving and are doing better than ever, we really have to make sure that we can accommodate kids no matter what their learning style and no matter what their mental health needs are.
This week in both the Senate and the Assembly, both chambers are scheduled to consider a proposal that in order to continue to offer online instruction, 2/3, a supermajority of a school board, would have to vote every 14 days. Your reaction to that idea, which is scheduled for debate, ma'am?
Yeah, I think that it's hard to have it both ways. It seems that in the legislature, they have decided that this needs to be a local decision for how our schools are run. And so I'm not sure why we're not trusting our locally elected officials to make those decisions and be well informed in moving forward. I'm not sure why we have to pile on additional mandates for how often they need to be reviewing that. I think our local officials and our administrators and educators are working really hard in a nearly impossible situation to continue making the best decisions that they can to support our kids, no matter what environment they are in.
And I want to ask you about an amendment that was recently debated on the floor of the state Senate. It said that during this pandemic, we should not publish test scores. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of debate going on right now around test scores. Certainly, we want to know how our kids are doing, but I think we also have to recognize that we are in the middle of a pandemic. And sometimes trying to grab a test score and not understanding the context for which they have been in is going to give us some really mixed information and false information. And so I think the most important thing is that our local teachers are able to assess where kids are and then be able to apply really high quality standards aligned instruction, support the kids that are behind in accessing that instruction to help them move forward. That's going to be what's key.
You taught in the Madison School District, were a principal, and then you oversaw elementary schools. You're well aware of the achievement gap numbers. They're really scary. How can they, achievement gap numbers, Madison, Milwaukee, Racine, how can they be closed in the future?
Yeah, so some of the work that I'm leading at the state right now is already getting results. So one of the things we know is that while we adopted newer, better, higher standards in literacy and mathematics, what we know is that our schools and our districts haven't quite been able to adopt instructional materials that are aligned to those standards. And so we've been leading on this, and in the places where our schools and our districts have adopted great materials that are aligned to our standards, they're getting results, and they're getting results quickly, not only for all kids, but the kids that seem to be growing the fastest are the kids that are the farthest behind. And as a bonus, the teachers are reporting increased job satisfaction, which to me is the right formula that we're moving in the right direction. And we need to make sure we're getting this done all across Wisconsin.
School choice is now a $750 million item in the state budget. Should it be expanded more? Should it be dialed back, or should it be maintained where it is?
It should not be expanded. We are not meeting our constitutional obligation to fully fund our public school system. We really have no business funneling all of this money into unaccountable private school systems. We really need to rethink and make sure that we are meeting our obligations to support our public school system.
What are the biggest needs, and how would you meet them in our rural school districts, ma'am?
Yeah, our rural schools face some very unique challenges. While they are a beautiful place where kids, I think everybody knows each other and kids feel like they're a part of a small family, they also face really significant challenges. I think sparsity aid is one of the things that is important for us to really rethink and make sure that we are increasing that, as well as removing the cap so more districts can have access to sparsity aid. I think transportation aid needs to be increased been looked at. Certainly top of the list is broadband. We need to make sure that our schools and our families and our kids are connected and at a speed where they can function in our society today, particularly in a situation where we're often having to do remote schooling. And so, recruiting teachers is also an issue. We need to make sure we're getting teachers that are interested in serving in our rural schools. And so it'll be important to focus on some of these specific needs.
Superintendent Sanford Taylor gave the governor a proposed 2021-23 budget asking for an additional $1.4 billion. You must have been part of that discussion. Why do we need $1.4 billion, which the former chairman of Joint Finance said there's not enough money for? But what about that additional ask for $1.4 billion? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, we cannot balance the cost of this pandemic on the backs of our kids and our teachers. We understand that we're in tough economic times, but we cannot stop from advocating for a strong equity budget. We are not meeting our needs of all of the kids across Wisconsin. It does not make sense that some kids get more money, more resources, more equipment than others in Wisconsin. That is a values statement. We are not fully funding the needs of our special education students or our English learner students. And so it is important that we are clear with the taxpayers of Wisconsin, and they tell us over and over and over that they support education. They are willing to have their taxes raised. Over 385 ballot measures for referenda in the last decade across Wisconsin. They want our schools to be fully funded. And so that is why we put forth a budget that is going to get that done.
And you and I have heard Republican legislators say, because of the number of referendums that have passed, that proves that we still need revenue limits, which can be exceeded through referendums. What about the revenue limits? Is it time after 20 years that they no longer limit the ability of the taxing ability of school districts?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I understand the need of taxpayers to be able to have their taxes not out of control. But time and time again, they're telling us that they care about our public schools enough to raise their own taxes. So absolutely, our state government is not doing its responsibility to fund our public schools, and our communities are telling them loud and clear that that is a priority for them, and it's about time we get it done at the state level.
With the additional ask for $1.4 billion, would that have gotten K12 back up to the 2/3 funding from the state, Sheila?
Yes, that is the state superintendent's goal, is to get back to 2/3 funding, as well as start to close that $1 billion gap in special education funding, because we know that when we don't fund our special education students, that not only hurts those students, but it hurts all of our students. And so that's another priority that we have as well.
The next superintendent will be obviously a member of the Board of Regents. What are your thoughts on tuition freezes and the greatest need of the UW system, please?
Yeah, certainly we need to make sure that college is affordable, and I have worked closely with our higher education partners to make sure that we're helping students not only plan their career pathway, but make sure that they're able to keep their own costs down as they make really strong, solid decisions about their future that's well informed and moving forward. But I think that it is a mistake for us not to fund our UW system. That is an economic engine of our state, and it's important that our state fulfill its obligation of funding our education system at the higher ed system, so that we can make sure tuition is affordable, and yet we still have this important, proud piece of the center of education in Wisconsin.
I'm asking this hypothetical of all candidates I'm interviewing today, and you're the fifth. If you were teaching a civics or a government class today, how would you teach on what happened on January 6th in the U.S. Capitol? How would you teach that?
Yeah, I am so grateful for our educators that stepped up into this really challenging situation, because we've been doing this for years in education. It is important for us to present the facts and then to help support our students in debating the issues, debating the opinions on the issues, debating what's the best way to move forward. Our teachers are very skilled in doing that, and I think that's really important to continue. I think the added challenge that has come of late for our teachers is seemingly our inability as a country to be able to agree on what facts are. And so I think a really important central piece of this has to be helping our students really understand how to fact check, how to understand, what is real, what is not real, and to be able to build their debate with one another, with empathy and understanding and civility in being able to decide how we move forward.
And then the final question, we've talked about a lot of issues. Is there any one issue that's very important in your campaign that I haven't touched on that you want to bring up in our closing seconds here, please?
Yeah, certainly. I would say we haven't talked about early childhood. I think early childhood is critically important. That's also why we put forth funding for full day 4K in this budget as well as the last. I think that's a critically important piece for us to make sure that we're always including. And so I would make sure that that also is high on the list of priorities moving forward.
Thank you. Sheila Briggs of DeForest is one of 7 candidates for the office of State Superintendent of Public Instruction. The primary is February 16th, the general election April 6th. Sheila, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care.